Did any of the following actually happen as described in these scary stories? Dogman reached in my window. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I once had an experience pretty similar to that scene from The Legend of Boggy Creek that nobody can ever forget. I still remember the commercial for that movie from the 1970s. A big, long, hairy arm reaches through the window and tries to grab a screaming girl. Only that movie was about Bigfoot, and in the experience I had, I saw Dogman reach into my house through the open window. Back then, we lived in a house my grandfather built himself just a bit east of New Orleans, in a place where I don't think it's legal for people to live, outside of maybe some forest rangers and people with a good reason to be there. The house was condemned and torn down when I was 19, and my family dispersed, looking for new homes and new ways to support ourselves. When this story happened, though, we were living off the land in a very true sense, hunting for food in an area that these days is protected. Now that I'm old and worldly, I can understand that it's better for that land to be protected, but that doesn't mean I'll ever stop missing the way things once were. Even though we had to live with snakes and gators, and, on this one occasion at least, we had to live with the Dogman. Of course, we didn't call it a Dogman. We called it the Loup-garou. My mother told me stories about the Loup-garou a few different times through my childhood. She would make up bedtime stories for me, and at least two of them that I can remember were about the Loup-garou. Another time, I misbehaved and got lost in the bayou, scaring the entire family. That night, I got a big old lecture from both parents about the Loup-garou, as well as a good spanking. You see, this was our local boogeyman. If you weren't good, the Loup-garou would come and get you. I was terrified of this monster dogman or werewolf until I was about 12 or 13, and then I stopped believing it was real. I figured it was just a made-up monster used to keep kids in line. Like a lot of kids that age, I thought I'd gotten the entire world figured out. What a dumb kid I was. Everyone knows you don't figure out the world until you're 16. So I was a young teen at the time, and I was reading the Sunday comics from a few weeks earlier that we had bought the last time we were in a town. I loved the comics, but there was no newspaper delivery to out where we were. I'm not sure it was legal to live there even then, and we didn't actually have any address that I ever remember. So let's get to the incident. I was sitting on the couch with the window to my right. It was a hot day as usual, so the window was open wide, and our big old brown stripy cat was resting on the lampstand right in front of the window. Out of nowhere, the cat screeched and hissed, then ran upstairs to one of his hiding spots. My mother and I both leaped up in surprise at the cat's sudden explosion, and I knew my heart was beating really fast. It had been a big rush of adrenaline, but after the cat ran away, we both laughed in relief. "What's out there that scared that flea bag?" asked my mother, laughing, and I walked over to the window to look. I was about to lean my head outside when something big as a bear jumped out in front of me and reached its long, hairy arm inside, reaching in to grab me by my face or neck. I literally did a half backflip, slipping and winding up on my back on the floor. My mother screamed like a lunatic, but I couldn't look at her because I was still sliding backwards along that floor to put some distance between myself and that clawing arm. I only stared at that arm and the monster connected to it. I could see the creature's head at moments, and it looked like a werewolf to me. A very long, snouted werewolf, almost a wolf head, but, not quite. The ears were on top like a dog, and the eyes had the look of a canine, not a human. But something about the shape of the face and skull, it helped that it was standing up on two legs. Well, I guess that part must be obvious, as I said it had an arm that was trying to grab my face. That implies that arm was not being used to support it. At the end of that arm was basically a hand. Although the fingers did not have fingernails, they had long and sharp claws, seemingly a lot more solid than fingernails, and a lot more deadly as well. I have an aversion to 3D movies because there always seems to be a moment in the film where something is stuck right in your face. Sometimes it's a sword or a fencing rapier. Sometimes it's an actual monster arm. In any case, 3D movies remind me of this event from my youth, and it puts me in a weird mood, unable to enjoy the rest of the movie. Some part of my inner child, or whatever you want to call it, felt like I must have done something wrong because this boogeyman from my childhood, this boogeyman I had stopped believing in, was coming to get me after all. And so, 3D movies make me feel guilty and bad and wrong, and they're more punishment than entertainment. I remember my mother coming out of nowhere and swinging a poker from the fireplace at that monster arm over and over. She missed every time, but the Lugaroo pulled its arm back out of the window, apparently just not wanting to deal with her. It trotted away into the bayou nonchalantly. I was on my feet, moving past my mother and slamming the window down as I watched the canine man exiting stage left. He didn't seem in any kind of rush at all. Of course, my mother and I wouldn't have been seen by it as any kind of threat. Life around there got tense for a while, as I don't even think my mother had actually believed in the Lugaroo until that incident. It's a strange kind of thing to cope with when you find out that one of your childhood bedtime stories turned out to be real after all. My father and uncle blew up when they heard about what happened, and they started trying to decide who the Lugaroo was. Back then, people thought the Dogman was a person who changed into a monster by using sorcery. There were very few other families in the bayou, but we knew each one of them by name. Paranoia replaced friendship with each of these clans, as we all suspected each other of being the Lugaroo. We must have lived there another 5 or 6 years before the old house got demolished. In all that time, the Lugaroo never reared its ugly, vicious-looking head again. Or maybe we just never noticed it, because we went out and bought ourselves window screens after. Dogman reached into my window. Don't go anywhere, we've got not one but 2 more Dogman stories to go. But first, I'ma bust this rhyme. Bradley Poole, he's no fool. Folks call him the king of cool. All the people love him madly. That's because he's Mr. Bradley. Please join us in thanking this episode's executive producer, Bradley Poole, the king of cool. He's who made this episode possible. To thank him, we share our weekly Sunday uncensored Dogman Stories Far Too Wild to ever run on this channel. Not only that, but he gets to see our 15 hours of archived uncensored stories. These Dogman incident narratives may have too much violence or gore or substance use or profanity. It's often something different, but the one thing in common is that I could never present those stories here. You can see them all too by joining our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com or by becoming a channel member after you click the join link under this or any of our videos. PQ Ribber will be along to explain it in more detail at the very end of this episode. And now, it's time for our second of 3 Dogman stories. This is a story about a young person's wish, and the reason they withdrew the wish later on that same night. And this is why we call the next story, Don't Ever Wish to See a Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was around 19 or 20, I took my brother, who we can call Roger, camping. He's 3.5 years younger than I am, but he had been camping with my parents and me before, so I thought he was mature enough to come along with me when my usual camping partner bailed. He had always acted like an adult on our previous camping trips, but once we were out there alone, I realized that was because he feared our father. When it was just me and him, He reverted to acting like a kid, and I really regretted bringing him with me. Besides having to be alert for all the usual hiking and camping reasons, I also had to watch out that Roger didn't do something to hurt himself or get lost. We were camping out in the middle of nowhere in Ohio, probably around Lincoln Township, between St. Mary's and Marietta. It wasn't an official campground. It was just the woods off of the highway where I parked my hand-me-down Nash Rambler. We were north of Yankeeburg and south of Cow Run, not very far north of the Ohio River, which is the line of separation between Ohio and West Virginia. We had each brought our own tents, but my brother was too scared to sleep alone. I was actually fine with that, as I would have worried about him being out of my line of vision out there. At least his fear of darkness caused him to behave a little better. Over dinner, when the sun hadn't completely set yet, Roger was being mischievous, and he said he wished we could see a dogman that night. I told him he should take back that wish, and he refused. I asked him what he would do if we really did have a dogman invade our space. He was acting all big and bad, and he insisted he would leave the tent to go get pics and videos. I rolled my eyes and said I would hold him to that. Once the sun had completely set, the darkness made him backtrack on several of the things he had said. Out in the woods, when night comes, it swallows you up entirely. It feels like a distinct personality, and Roger was clearly intimidated by it. I laughed to lighten the mood as we settled into our sleeping bags, and I told him he should relax. Nothing was going to happen. And that is when things started to happen. First, there was a howling, and I mean a very loud howling, as in a very close howling. Roger started crying and praying, swearing that he didn't really want to see a dogman after all. That was when something ran past our tent, very close by. My brother was a mess, bawling. I told him to cry more quietly, as I was not too much less frightened than he was. Listening to the howling outside, listening to the occasional sounds of something large and bipedal making its way through our camp, I never felt so absolutely alone and so completely lost before. There was no father to turn to. I was the only one who could protect us both, so I did my best not to let my fear show for Roger's sake. Needless to say, my brother never left the tent to get pics or video, as he had insisted he would do in this circumstance. Instead, he spent almost the entire rest of the night in a fetal position in the center of the tent, forcing me to stay close to the side, which made me feel even more vulnerable than before. When our uninvited visitor would run past our tent, I could feel it brushing up against the side. It was clearly something big, heavy, and two-legged, running past us over and over. When the sun finally came up, I felt even more tense than before. Sure, I was happy that the creature taunting us was gone, but I hadn't slept all night, and neither had Roger. Now we had to pack up and hike out of the region while exhausted and emotionally upset. Once out of the tent, we both saw the big dog tracks all around our camp. They were as big as my brother's outstretched hand and not much smaller than mine. Roger didn't get his wish to see the dogman, but that was only because he didn't have the nerve to look outside. The dogman certainly gave us both enough chances to see it. And in case you haven't already figured out the moral to this story, I will repeat it to you. Don't ever, but ever, wish to see a dogman. Dogman lives in caves with goblins. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I know you do a lot of dogman stories, and I bet you've heard some goblin stories too. but I am a lifelong Kentucky resident, and I may be the first person ever to tell you a story of goblins with Dogman. The two kinds of creatures, at least locally here, have a mutually beneficial relationship, and together they are probably responsible for legends of Tommyknockers, at least in my opinion. Just like we humans live together with dogs and cats, so do the goblins of my region live in caves and caverns, in harmony with the Dogman. Oh, I'm sure they probably have their incidents of not getting along, just as bad things sometimes happen between dogs and people, but for the most part, their species live in peace and collaboration with each other. I could be wrong about that, but I have seen them together with my own eyes, and the goblins clearly had no fear at all of the Dogman. Let me tell you about it. Down here in Kentucky, we have an awful lot of caves. We've got big caves and small ones, medium too. Why, in Rock Castle County alone, we've got the Across the Road Cave, Angel Pit, Arthur Singleton's Cave, Artesian Well Cave, Barnett Valley Cave, Big Holla Cave, Bluegrass Grotto Cave, Climax Cave, Cooksburg Cave, Dewey's Drop, Drummer's Pit, Endless Cave, Eureka Cave, Humongous Canyon Cave, Hot Box Cave, Lassie Cave, Mullins Spring Cave. I'm only up to the letter M, and this is only one of a number of counties in Kentucky with an awful lot of caves. I haven't even mentioned the famous Mammoth Cave, nor the caves and mines located in and around Hellier that have gotten so much attention recently. Kentucky is a mysterious place, with many more mysterious places within it. Now, the cave where I saw the Dogman with some of our local goblins was in the vicinity of Carter Caves, but I'm not going to tell you exactly where, because you can get in a lot of danger there. Besides, if you need me to tell you where it is, then you aren't a true caver. And this is a location that should only be checked out by the most experienced of cavers. So I discovered this place on my own, and I can't find any listing or mention of it anywhere. I was tempted to name it after myself, but before I could get within 50 feet of the cave opening, which is in the side of a short hill, I saw eye shine coming from inside the darkness inside the cave. Something made me duck behind a tree when I saw that. I felt an icy kind of fear grab hold of me, and I noticed that my hand holding onto the tree trunk was shaking all over. Maybe it was because I thought I was alone and found out I wasn't, or maybe I was afraid that it was a bear or a big cat in there, about to come out and get me. All I know is that I was intensely and instantly afraid. I have encountered a bear before, and it was intimidating and stressful, but I had never seen any kind of wildcat, and I know how fast and strong they can be. What came out of that cave entrance was not a bear or a cat, though. It was something far closer to a dog, but an incredibly tall one that walked bipedally, although with a kind of a hunched-over posture. I didn't know what I was looking at, and in my head, I called it a Tommyknocker right off the bat. It was only later when I typed its description into Google that I started to learn about real-life werewolves and the Dogman. So as I was thinking, that must be what a Tommyknocker looks like. All these small grayish things bounced out of the cave behind the big hairy dog-like caveman. They were like 2 or 3 feet tall, I think, assuming the Dogman was 7 or 8 feet tall. That might be a poor assumption, though, because of the angle I was looking at the situation from. But let's go with it, because at least it's a starting point. So these little gray things are bouncing all around, walking fast and bouncing, and to be honest, I thought they were some kind of insane rabbit at first. When one of them jumped and climbed up to the Dogman's shoulder, I saw it had these immense eyes, larger than owl's eyes, and the creature seemed to be making a chittering sound to the dog-like creature. I didn't know what I was looking at. Were those smaller things attacking the larger one? But then, the dogman sort of rubbed noses with the small gray space alien-looking gremlin, and then the little thing seemed satisfied. It hopped back down off the dogman's shoulder and ran back inside. The dogman bent down and seemed to be doing something with its hands to the other small goblin people. It seemed like they were saying goodbye, and when they finished, they ran back inside the darkness of the cave. Then, the dogman ran off to my left so fast, he created a small breeze in his wake. So, now you know why I've never investigated the interior of that cave I discovered, and now you know why I won't name it or report it to others. When I've told a very few people about this over the years, they almost never seem to believe me. And one time, this guy told me that even if he gave me the benefit of the doubt and accepted that I really saw what I said I saw, how could I justify saying all those things about how the dogman species and the goblin species are friendly based on just one sighting? In response, I said something to the effect of, heck, Grover Krantz theorized Bigfoot migration and mating habits, and he never even saw one. I've seen 5 or 6 of those goblins interacting with a dogman, and I'm telling you, it was almost like the kids saying goodbye to their dad before he went to work. Or maybe it was like the family pets seeing off the master of the house. There was a very strong familiarity between all of them, and they seemed to have a closeness or a bond. I can't extrapolate too much further off that scant bit of evidence, I admit, but I feel completely secure in stating my firmly held opinion that dogmen live in caves with goblins.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it. You can become a channel member by clicking the join link below. Then you can check our community page to find the links to 10 hours or more of secret, uncensored Dogman stories too wild to be told on this channel. Your other option is to join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's Peter's homemade club, where he will personally email you the links as well as occasional secret club messages. You may also be included as an executive producer in a future episode. You have a scary experience you want to tell us about? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com, or else call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LESS-SCARY. The machine cuts off every few minutes, so if you have a long story, please keep calling back and we'll piece it together later on. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.